Hi guys and gals, today we're going to talk about the warm-up. I'm going to go through the details of what considerations you should keep in mind before starting each session. Warming up should be based on your needs. A lot of people have this mistake that they think that warm-up is just a routine that you should do for many years, and it's just something consistent, and that's wrong. You should warm up based on the needs that you have. The same way that your training changes from time to time, whether it's because of injuries, because your strength has increased or decreased, or I don't know, you want to challenge your body in a different way, the weight has changed, the range of motion has changed, the flexibility has changed, and a lot of other variables. The warm-up needs to be based on those facts as well. So before going through the video, I've got to mention that of course the things that I'm going to mention are not going to be applicable for everybody, but for majority of the people it's going to be correct. So the example that I'm going to give you in this video is going to be a sedentary individual. When I talk through the details with an example, you're going to understand a lot more. Of course, the things that I'm going to say are going to apply to everybody, but the example is going to be for majority of people, because there are people who are spending majority of their days on their feet and they are active. These things are going to apply to them, but we're not going to go through that much of a detail for them, although I'm going to make another video for them as well. But today we're going to talk about specifically the people who spend the majority of their day on a desk, whether they're just on a computer working or they're studying, or for whatever reason, the majority of their day is like this, seated. Now, there are two main positions that majority of people have when they are seated. I'm going to show you from the side. The first one, you can cross the legs like this and work, or you just bring it back like this and work. The second one is going to be this. So people are just slouching back, the feet are a little bit forward, and they're just doing their job. Now, starting with the first one, which was this, we're gonna come from all the way down, cover everything all the way up. When I'm in this position, the feet are back and I'm on my toes. Now, whether my legs are crossed or not, it doesn't matter that much. As you can see, the toes are down in this position. You rarely see people being all the way on their heels. Majority of people are on their toes or like this. And when you're in this position and you come to the gym, and on the leg days you also train the calf, this muscle, and as mentioned in my last videos, I rarely see people train the tibialis anterior, which a lot of people don't even know what tibialis anterior is, but it's the exact opposite muscle of the calf. So the gastrocs and the soleus are here, the tibialis anterior is here, and when you train this muscle a lot and you go and sit down majority of the day, again like this, you are making tightness in this area and you're really stretching the front. What you're doing is like going to the gym and just training bicep and not doing any tricep exercise. Of course, after a while you're gonna be like this. It's gonna be hard to extend the elbow fully. So this is the first thing. Now, whether the exercise causes them to hold their position like this, or because they are constantly like this, they go to the gym and again they train the calf, and of course not knowing how to train the anterior as well is gonna be another reason. But anyway, this happens a lot of the time because this is back, and as you can see the quad is stretched. A lot of people have weakness in this area as well. Now, the reason that the quad is stretched is not just because the knee is bent. The main reason is because people have tight hip flexors, so they are in this position, so they have an anterior tilt here, and because of the hip flexor tightness that they get because of sitting constantly, and because of that they have tight hamstrings. So because the hamstrings are tight, because the hip flexors are really tight because of sitting constantly, they cannot keep the lower feet forward. So because it's tight, they need to bring it back. So because of that, they have tightness in here. Here is a stretch. Again, the opposite muscle needs to be a stretch. When this is tight, this is gonna be weak. When this is tight, this is gonna be weak. And as you can see, because I'm seated, I am in this flexed position of my hip. And of course, as mentioned, the hip flexors are tight, so again the front is tight, the glutes are weak. And when I come a little bit higher, the lower back, again because of this anterior tilt, here is tight, and the hip flexors, again because they tilt forward, they're gonna stretch the abs. So the front side is gonna be weak, the back side is gonna be tight. Now, majority of people also have the problem of hyperkyphosis on their thoracic spine. So they are in this position as well. And of course, this is gonna stretch the muscles on the back and tighten the muscles here. Again, the first condition we talked about, tightness on the calf, is gonna be a stretch here, a stretch here, tightness on the hamstring, again tightness here, a stretch on the glutes, again tightness here, a stretch here, again a stretch back, tightness on the front upper part. So this was the first one. The second one was when the lower leg was forward like this, and I had this time a posterior tilt. Now, you might think that this is the opposite of what was happening, but that's not right actually. When I'm in this position, again starting from all the way down, still my toes are down. As you can see, my leg is forward, my toes are still down. I'm not in this position, I'm not stretching here. Again, of course, it's not gonna be like this, but still, I'm not getting a good stretch here, but here is a little bit more stretch. Now, the reason that I can bring my leg forward this time and do not keep it back is because when you're in this posterior tilt, the hamstring is a little bit freer. So when you go anteriorly tilted, it's gonna be a stretch, so it cannot let the leg come forward. But when you're posteriorly tilt, it's a little bit freer. But that doesn't mean that it's getting a stretch. No, the length of the muscle is the same, just the way that your body is positioned is different. So in this position, still the quads are not getting contracted or anything, but the quads are in a better place, so they are not in a constant stretch. They are in a better place, but still the hamstrings are getting tight because although you're in this position, but you're not like this. Still you have the bend in the knee and posteriorly tilted. And when this happens for a long period, you're gonna get the tightness. Here, the glutes are not getting stretched like the first condition, but still because of the flexion of the hip, they're gonna be a little bit stretched. And on the other hand, the hip flexors are not that tight like the first condition, but still, although you have this tilt here, but because you're sitting, it doesn't matter how much posterior you tilt, still because you have the flexion of the hip, it's gonna be activated, but you're not gonna have that much tight hip flexion with this variation and that much stretch glutes in this variation of sitting. So again, here is tight, here is a stretch, here is a stretch, still a little bit, here is still a little bit tight, here is still a little bit tight, here is still a little bit stretch, and the core in front is this time tight because of that posterior tilt, and also because you're flexed in this position, the core is gonna be tight, and at the same time the lower back is gonna be straight. So the main difference between these two types of sitting is whether the rectus abdominis and the muscles in this area are tight or stretched, and whether the muscles on the back are tight or stretched. The first one was stretching the front, tightness on the back. The second one was tightness in the front and stretching on the back. And of course, still you see that hyperkyphalic position in those people. So still they have that arch in the upper back, which as mentioned is going to be tight, stretched on the back and tightness in the front. Now, considering the things that I just said, when you spend hours, days, weeks, months and years in these positions, your body is gonna get the form of this sitting position as well. So the muscles are gonna be adapted to this style. So what happens is that when you come to the gym, whether you have the first condition or the second condition, you're gonna see that even doing body weight squat is gonna be hard for you, and the reason is because you just push the hip too much back, because you cannot bring the knee forward. I have a video about the squats, I'll go through the details, but for you to be able to bring the knees forward, you need to stretch the calf, because the feet is on the ground and you bring in the knee forward, and when you're tight here, the heel is just gonna come off the ground. So you're gonna see that you've got a lot of tightness in this area. And coming a little bit higher, when you come to the hamstring, again, because this is tight, you might see that even a body weight good morning is hard. So you cannot come any lower than this. You just come here and then you feel a really heavy tightness and you come up, or when you come down, you're just arching yourself a lot. So going to this posterior tilt to add length to your hamstring. You should be able to come down with a good range by keeping a little bit of arch in your back, and it should be comfortable for you. And you should come a little bit lower actually, because I have a little bit of tightness in my hamstring as well. You should come a little bit lower and be able to keep your leg straight. If you see that you're struggling to keep the arch in the back, and when you come down, you're just curving, or you're just bending the knee, it means that you've got the tightness in your hamstring. Coming a little bit higher, both of those conditions, the hip flexors were tight because you were sitting and you were flexing your hip for a long period. If you see that it's really hard for you to just, I don't know, hold this position or do this, stretch, and it's really hard for you and you just come back, it's just hard for you to push the hip forward and rotate, or come up and rotate, which I already have talked about. It means again you've got tightness in this area. Or another test, if you when you lay down, it's just a lot of back pain for you. When the leg is straight, it means that because the hip flexors is too tight, it's just bringing the spine too much up or creating that anterior tilt too much, and that's causing your back pain. So again, a lot of people have back problems because of tight hip flexors. I have mentioned it several times in other videos as well. So this means that you've got tightness here as well. Coming a little bit higher, now we've got to talk about the core itself. If you see that your condition was like the first one, which means that you had stretch your core, you're gonna first of all see that that blue thing that you can see is also a sign that you have weakness in front. But to be completely sure, just a simple test of curving your lower back and coming down can show it. So if you feel a lot of pain in this area, it means that you've got probably tightness in that area. Now, of course, there can be other reasons like bulging disc or things like that as well, but normally they go all the way down. So the tightness or spasm in this area is just going to be in that area. And of course, you've got to talk to a specialist if you have back problems. Talking about the second condition, which was the opposite of this, which you had tightness here and a stretch on the lower back. In that case, this is going to be pretty much easy, but the opposite is going to be hard. So if you, for example, want to do this, you're going to see that you cannot just push the hip too much forward and bring the chest back, and it's just really hard. So you're just bending the knee, and it's really hard for you to push your stomach forward. So if these are your issues, you should stretch your body based on these facts. Now, I've got a video about stretches. I'll go through the details of how you should stretch, but that is for cool down. Now we're talking about the warm-up. That video is about static stretches, meaning, for example, you just hold a stretch for a period of time and then you release it. But that's not that much a good option for warming up. The reason is it might cause injuries because you're taking away the strength of the muscle. Now, this is a very big and controversial topic. It's gonna be a topic of itself, whether you should do a static or dynamic stretches before training and after training. We're not gonna go through it, but for now, the majority of specialists believe that static stretches should be done after the exercise and dynamic stretches before the exercise. So a static stretch is just, for example, holding this position. So in this case, we are stretching the tricep. The dynamic stretch is gonna be, for example, just doing this with your own hand. So you are stretching the tricep, but it's gonna be with the movement. It's not a constant stretch, it's dynamic. You're moving your body, but still stretching that muscle as well. And it's gonna be really good for the joints around the muscle as well. So, if you have tightness in your calf, just holding something and trying to bring the knee forward as much as you can, just for a few reps, until you get a good range of motion. Is gonna be good. And if the tightness is really bad, just holding a static stretch for a small period of time is gonna be alright. So I don't know, for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, it's gonna be alright. Now, of course, the static stretches are not completely bad before starting your session. It's just, for again, majority of people, static stretches are not a good option. But if you're really tight, you can do a few static stretches before your training. Just make sure after the static stretches, again, you do a few dynamic stretches for that muscle, so it has that flexibility and a lubrication in the joints as well. Now, we talked about the calf, we're gonna talk about the hamstring. Again, just try to do a few good mornings. So come up, come down. You don't need any weight, you're just trying to stretch it with your own body weight. Coming a little bit higher. Now, you can do hip bridges to activate the glutes and also stretch the hip flexors. So, up down, up, down, up, down. Make sure you squeeze with your glutes, so push the heels down, squeeze the glutes, and also point the knees a little bit out, so you squeeze the glutes well, and you also stretch the hip flexors as well. Also, again, if it's really tight, just try to do this stretch. Again, showing from the front. Again, legs out, and do this stretch a little bit higher. If you have tightness in the lower back, and here is really a stretch, you can just again do this, or do a few crunches. You're gonna work here and stretch on the back, and vice versa. If the tightness is here, the stretch is on the back, you can do a few hyper extensions to work on the back and stretch here, or again do this. And of course, a few of these stretches were working on other muscles that, for example, were tight. For example, I don't know, when you do this, you're not just stretching the hip flexors, you're tightening your lower back a little bit as well, but you've got to consider the main muscle that you're targeting. If you've got, for example, tightness in the lower back, it's not going to be that much of a, I don't know, extra tightness for the lower back to hold this position for a few seconds compared to the benefits of hip flexion stretch. Coming a little bit higher, we talked about the tightness here and a stretch on the back. Again, the thing that we said with this position, so elbows back, push it forward, make sure you bring the shoulder back, squeeze the shoulder blades together, feel the stretch here, and hold it. If it's really hard to hold this position, come a little bit lower and bring the elbows in. If not, go as high as you can. I've talked about it before as well. And of course, the dynamic way to do it is just gonna be like this. So you're stretching the front and you're tightening the back. Now, these were for creating that flexibility. When you create the flexibility, after that you've got to lubricate the joints as well. So it's good to do these stretches for each session. So it doesn't matter whether you're doing bicep, tricep, or whatever. For majority of exercises, it's better to have the flexibility in your entire body, so the balance in your muscles in your entire body, because things can affect each other. For example, if you've got tightness in the hamstring, it's gonna be hard to do back rows. You're training another muscle, but it's gonna affect it. So aside from that as well, you need to stretch the tight muscles consistently, so you can create that flexibility all the time. If you just stretch them on the days that you're training them, they're not going to be that much stretched because you're spending the majority of the time being seated. So it's better to stretch them again and again and again. And of course, I've talked about the leg swings and external rotations, and I go through a lot of details. Do them as well. Warming up the shoulder and the hip is really important, but for that you should do them based on the training session that you have. So if you're training the arms, external, internal rotations are going to be good. If you're training the leg swings forward and back and side to side is going to be good. And of course, the things that I just talked about are going to use the knee as well. Aside from all of these topics, make sure you start by going with a lighter weight and focus on the mind-muscle connection first and go through a good range of motion. If you saw that flexibility is good and everything else is in place, then you can increase the weight.